or enjoy the same things that you condemn, then you're guilty in the same way. And God is not unjust in judging you with that same measuring stick that you have judged others. He's going to judge you to the highest standard you ever held. And then he does this again in chapter 2 with the Jews. Okay, only this time the Jews are judging themselves to be more righteous than others because after all, they had the law. Okay, it was a big deal that God gave them the law. Okay, they were teachers and they were preachers and they were receivers of this law. But Paul turns to the Jews in verse 21 of chapter 2, and he says, "Therefore thou that teachest another, teachest thou not thyself? Thou that preachest that a man doth not steal, dost thou steal? Thou that sayest a man should not commit adultery, dost thou commit adultery? Thou that abhorrest idols, dost thou commit sacrilege?" Okay, so he turns on them. The Jews were judging themselves to be righteous because they had this law, and they taught and preached the law of God, but they were not practicing what they preached, and were therefore guilty sinners in God's eyes. And then he does it again in chapter 3. Okay, he goes about bringing up this heresy that's being taught by the Jews. If you remember, the Jews claim that unbelief, just because we don't believe, we can make the gospel of no effect. Okay, Paul then caused us to judge and to agree with the reality that just because you don't believe the gospel doesn't mean it's of no effect. Okay? And the Jews also, afterwards, listening to Paul preach, they started claiming this, that sin was okay because it glorified God. I think you remember that from the last few times. And then we agreed with Paul, okay, that those who would lead people away from Jesus by saying, just because we don't believe Jesus is untrue, and your sin will glorify God, so it's okay to sin. All these ridiculous ideas he brings us out and he causes us to judge them. And he turns around and he says, these folks who are leading people away from Jesus, who are leading people to hell by taking away the gospel message, he says their damnation is just. That was Paul's words. Okay, and we turn around and we say, yes, their damnation is just. If you're leading people away from Jesus, you don't understand how important it is to keep people out of the fires of hell. Why are you doing that? Your damnation is just. He brought us out and he caused us to judge again, and then he turns around in verse 9. You should have that on your papers. And he says, what then? Are we better than they? No, in no wise. For we have proved before both Jews and Gentiles that are under sin, that they are under sin. Now that word before there that you see, you should understand that a little more now, since we went over chapter 1 and chapter 2. How he drew us out and caused us to judge the heathen. Okay, he proved it before. He again then drew out the Jews and showed them that they were sinners. He proved that again. In chapter 3, he does it again. So here when he says, no, in no wise, we are not better than they, he says, for we have proved before both Jews and Gentiles that they are under sin. That's what he's been doing this whole time. He wants to make sure that when he's done speaking, that nobody can say anything to him about not being a sinner. That nobody can say anything to themselves in truth and not realize that they are a sinner. Okay, that's what Paul's driving at. He's been spending 3 chapters doing this. All right, and then he comes to verse 10. And he says, as it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. So Paul's finally achieved where he's going. Okay, he's bringing everybody to understand that there's none righteous, not the Gentiles, not the Jews, nobody. Okay, everybody is under sin. He finally gets to this verse. And it's a famous verse that many of us know. As it is written, there's none righteous, no, not one. But today I want you to notice that there's a colon there. Okay? That there's a colon right after no, not one. Because now, he's going to, in these next verses, he's going to be describing these sinners. Okay? There's none righteous, no, not one, means that we're all sinners. We're all dirty, two-faced, rotten, scheming liars. Okay? And we all deserve the fires of hell. If you're saved today, you know what God saved you from. And when you look back at your life, you know that you deserve the fires of hell, but he loved you and he saved you from that. So there's none righteous, no, not one. So